It's finally here, Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, one of two games that I've actually gotten the Platinum Trophy on, literally after 3 days of playing it. Same thing goes with Marvel Spider-Man, which I Platinum Trophied recently. But when you compare the two games, the web slinging is very similar, but they all have their own way of web slinging. These two games are very similar to each other. I have to say, mainly with the web sling and the diving, there's very big similarities, but I think Miles Morales has more creativity with the diving and web sling. I mean, heck, look at all these new web sling animations that they've made. Mainly when you press the square button and just move around with the left analog stick, you can do all these weird tricks. That adds a lot more to the web sling, way more than the last Marvel Spider-Man game offered. But again, that's just one minor thing that I think that was improved here. I mean, other things that I also thought were improved, other than the amazing web sling, I thought definitely was the improvements of the far-fetched stealth mechanics. And the stealth mechanics, technically in Miles Morales, they added the ability to do stealth takedowns on walls, do it invisible in front of somebody on the ceiling. But in the old game, all you were able to do was sneak up behind them, web strike takedowns, and the perch. But in the combat, they all have their different versions of unique fighting. Mainly with Peter, he does simple kicks, and Miles hits punches. With their finishers, on the other hand, they're very similar, just different styled ways of fighting. Mainly with Peter, yeah, he does a lot of flips and swings with his webs, while Miles usually tries to parkour his way around enemies, doing flips using his Venom Power Punch electricity attacks on most enemies. And he does very similar things with each move. I mean, similar with jumping and swinging and using his webs to kick enemies in the face. I feel like Miles' finishers are almost just as good as Peter, so I think they're even on that. But with fighting style, I have to say I would probably give that to Peter, because I think mostly of Peter's fighting styles, it's easier to get used to. With Miles, it's pretty good as well, but there are times where it's not easy to dodge enemies or the impact of how hard these hits go. But the finishers, I'd say they're pretty much even on attacks. But when it comes to boss battles, there is not that many villains to fight in this game. There's two fights with the Rhino, there's the Prowler and the Tinkerer. Even though there's only a couple amount of boss battles, I feel like the execution of these fights were really well done, and it really makes you think based on the main attacks. I mean, the first boss is obviously easy with the Rhino. All you mainly need to do is just Venom Punch him and hit him until he goes down. Simple as that. Mainly it has to do with Peter getting knocked out in the fight, and now you have to take over. But I have to say, this fight kind of takes the idea of the skill of Venom Power, and it's a good way of introducing it, because one way of introducing a big power is when you use it on a big guy. Kind of like how Peter mentioned in the first game, when the other person's bigger, you gotta be quicker, which is exactly what happens right here. When Miles is fighting the Rhino, he charges, but Miles jumps out of the way, implying he was quicker than the Rhino, gets his head bashed, and continues to use his Venom Power abilities to stun him, until he eventually will win and the Rhino will lose consciousness in the battle. But I'd say this fight really does show a lot of good animations when it comes to finishers and how to take him down. In the second version of the Rhino fight, he now has red armor, which keeps him immune to your Venom Power attacks, implying you have to crash him into these tanks until eventually you can punch all the armor off of him. And when you do, you'll be able to use the Venom Powered punches. But mainly here, you're frequently just dodging over him and making him crash into tanks until eventually all that red armor comes off. And eventually half of his horn does too. But in this fight right here with the Prowler, mainly Miles gets caught by his uncle and is forced to stay down there because he doesn't want him to die like how his father did. So this fight mainly bases on the Prowler just going into camouflage and popping out of nowhere. And mainly what you need to do is just dodge his attacks and mainly hit him until he goes camouflaged again. It's kind of mix and repeat on there. It's a very unique fight, better than the way I'm explaining it, but the way you strategize in it really makes it interesting. And sometimes it's almost fascinating to see what happens if you don't dodge, just to see those animations. It really is. With the Tinkerer right here, this is probably the best boss battle in the game, obviously. I mean, one, it's the final boss. Not every time the final boss is the best, but I definitely would say it is here. From all the imagery that it shows here, from dodging the attacks and even the cutscenes before and after the fight starts, it really shows what this game is capable of. PS4 or PS5, this game and this fight just looks amazing. But I have to say, this fight right here with the Tinkerer mainly bases off you dodging a bunch of sword attacks and charge attacks, while eventually it does lead to more intense things. but I have to say the execution of it is very well done. There's a lot of good writing into it, and I'd say that the gameplay really fits well, and the colors of the scene too really makes it more unique, and in some ways a little bit more intense. And this is just my opinion, but I actually think this is a better finale to the Marvel Spider-Man game than the fight with Dr. Octopus, mainly because I felt like this fight was more challenging than the Dr. Octopus. All you did with that fight was merely just web his arms and then just hit him, but in this fight you have to strategize when to hit the Tinkerer and just be quick about it, because if you try to hit her for too long, she will use her shield attack. And it really makes the fight more unique, especially if you're on the harder difficulties. And I'd say the fight just looks amazing when fighting it. And also there are challenges in the game, which is probably the worst part of the game. One is the combat challenges, then there's the race challenges, and then there is the stealth challenges. And I have to say, this is the one thing I was probably getting mad about the most, mostly in my first playthrough, but when you do your New Game Pluses, when you're at higher levels, these challenges are a lot easier. Another thing I want to mention was the map of the game. The map looks really good in these two games, very well done. I have to say, these maps, one thing I like is that in this map, they actually don't make you go after all those radio towers like you did in the last game. And probably my favorite thing that they've added in the game, other than these collectibles they've added from collecting the boxes hidden around the area, I think they're called capsules, but mainly, other than those, is the fact how they added a replayable missions thing. The fact how you can now replay missions in this game is amazing. I just love replaying the missions in this game. I really wish that was in Marvel Spider-Man. I don't know if it's in the remastered version because I don't have a PS5, but if it is, I'd love to know that it is in there, because that would be amazing if they did. Right now with me, I don't intend to get a PS5 for a while, but when it does get cheap enough, I'll probably pick one up. But otherwise, this is a really good Spider-Man game. It's definitely worth buying, but it's not perfect. I'll cover the flaws in probably a sequel video. But otherwise, see you guys.